crash course to adjudication. So I'm not going to pretend to equip you with enough skills to be a fabulous adjudicator in 50 minutes or however long I have, less probably. But basically what I want to do is I want to go through enough of the principles that you will be able to apply if you need to, and if you're a debater, you'll know something about adjudicators. So why should you actually bother learning about adjudication? Because I know a lot of people hate it. Well, firstly, you might actually want to become an adjudicator. You can make money from doing that. I'll talk about that later. You might be judging at Easters, in which case, better to learn now than later. And usually the MUD's internal comps have a requirement that everyone in the team adjudicates at some point. So you probably can't evade adjudicating, even if you think you can. I think it's really helpful as a speaker to know what adjudicators are looking for, because if you make the adjudicator's job easy, you're more likely to do better in the debate. So that's pretty much the purpose. Hopefully you understand how the process works better, and if you're a debater, or when you're a debater, you understand feedback better. So, who is the adjudicator? It's pretty wanky, I suppose, but the way that we talk about adjudicators is as if they're average, reasonable people. And basically that's the adjudicator's outlook on the world. So it's how much they know, how much they understand, what they bring to the debate. So that means they don't have any special knowledge. So if you're doing an arts degree or a science degree or whatever, and someone gets up and says something that's wrong, but you only know it because you're doing some course that, like, you've looked at it, that means you're not going to take that into account as a judge. You're not going to be like, well, you told me that it was X chromosome, but I know it's this other one, so no. Much like I'm doing a law degree and when students are like, we have rights in the Constitution, inside part of me wants to die, but that doesn't mean that I get to enter the debate and say, no, you were wrong, and there are no express rights in the Australian Constitution. So, they don't have any special knowledge. But that said, they're not totally stupid either. So, to the extent that you're a debater and you're thinking, how much do I have to explain this? What can I assume the adjudicator knows? You can assume they have some general knowledge. So if you walked up to a random in the street and you said, tell me what you know about climate change, roughly what they could give you in response, like, oh, well, you know, it's a bit of a problem, it's causing some havoc environmentally, whatever, is probably what you could assume your adjudicator knows. So you don't have to break things down to, you know, ridiculous levels, like they're a primary school child, or, you know, they've never seen a newspaper. You can assume they have some following of current affairs, but you want to make sure you're explaining anything that's particular, or that would be special knowledge. Okay, so that's why adjudicators are neutral. So in theory, if your adjudicator's doing their job properly, they'll be the average reasonable person, and they won't enter the debate, they won't be biased, their personal opinion won't matter. So what's the role of the adjudicator? To decide who wins. There always has to be a winner in debating. There are no draws, there's no like penalty overtime, none of that stuff. At the end of the debate, one team wins. And the reason for that is just when you have two teams worth of 3 speakers that each speak for 8 minutes, there's no way that those teams can be exactly the same. There will be always some differences between the teams that are going to be, you know, setting them apart. So there's never a draw. CAs of tournaments hate draws. I hate draws. Everybody hates draws because they have a lot of paperwork involved. So if you're ever adjudicating, don't give a draw, people won't like you. And the key principle of adjudication, and basically what you have to keep in mind throughout all the rest of my slides today, and if you ever do adjudicate, is just persuasiveness. It's the same question that you ask yourself. Was that persuasive or wasn't it persuasive? There's not a lot of ways, in fact there are no ways, to automatically lose a debate, with the exception of not having enough speakers, in which case you will forfeit. But in terms of doing the debate, there's no way to actually lose automatically. There's also nothing that will give you an automatic loss of points. So speaking over time doesn't mean you'll lose like 1 point for every 10 seconds. It's not that calculated. It's all about whether something makes you more or less persuasive. And that's not to say you won't be penalised for things that aren't persuasive. You will, but it's not done in a kind of check-the-box calculated way. So you always want to be asking yourself, is that making someone more, or me, is that making me more or less persuasive as a speaker? So there's 3 areas of adjudication, which are just the ways that we score. So anyone who's seen a MUD score sheet or a score sheet from the DAB or anywhere else will recognise it. So 3 areas: matter, manner, and method. Matter is what you say. It's like the content of the argumentation. Manner is the presentation style, you know, body language, vocal style. And then method, organisation, structure, role fulfilment, stuff like timing, having a definition if you need one, models if you need them, get rolled into there. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say, if you have any questions, please just interrupt. I'll just go like full balls ahead if you do. Matter. So, this includes both substantive and responsive material. So as a judge, when you're thinking about someone's content and the quality of their argumentation and their material, you have to think about both their prepared material and their substantive material and their rebuttal. their responsive material. So that means as a debater that your rebuttal is expected to be just as well developed, just as well explained as your substantive material is. So that's why kind of the one-line response you often get in rebuttal, which is like, they said that there's no bombs in Iraq, we don't agree, and isn't particularly persuasive. It needs to be filled out like any other argument. There's two key elements to matter, logic and relevance. Sounds pretty clear. Let's start with relevance because it's really easy. Obviously, the arguments that you make and the way that you develop those arguments needs to be relevant to the topics. They have to support the proposition of the team. You can make a really fabulous argument that's super logical and super well developed about like healthcare in America, but if your debate's about Australia and you don't tell us why that situation is analogous or why it's going to work here, then that argument isn't relevant. It kind of fails that really fundamental test. The second element is logic. So whether an argument flows from the premises that set it up, so whether the conclusion flows appropriately from those premises. I've got a warning though about this one. Not all premise plus premise equals conclusion arguments will actually be true. So a lot of debaters get really good at setting up their argumentation style and they say, well, this happens all the time and in this scenario it's the same, therefore we can expect this outcome, or we've seen this happen, now we've got this, therefore this will happen. You need to be actively involved as an adjudicator in the debate. So don't just see the premise-conclusion structure or recognise the way the argument's been formed and buy the outcome. You have to actively consider that. And for a silly example, stolen from Tony Kung, if anyone remembers him, he's quite old in buds. Tables have 4 legs, Snoopy has 4 legs, therefore Snoopy is a table. No. Right? So there's nothing wrong with the structure of the argumentation, right? Premise, conclusion. But if you were considering this, I hope most of you would recognise that that's not going to be true. It's not going to be logical. So you still have to actively consider that kind of thing. But basically, in summary, matter considers people's material, but it considers their responsive and their substantive material. So keep that in mind when you're a debater, but also keep in mind that the adjudicator isn't just going to take your argumentation for granted. A good adjudicator will actually be assessing the content of your material. So that's why if you think something's counterintuitive, or if you think that it's a weird example that you have but you want to use it anyway, you want to make sure you're explaining why it's relevant, how it's going to work in the debate. A lot of that legwork gets forgotten. People are like, well, it's clearly obvious why I'm saying this argument, but it might not be to the adjudicator. So you really want to make sure you're doing that legwork for them. Issues with matter. You can't have truistic arguments, like tomorrow is the day after today, and there's no response, right? There's nothing that your opposition can do. You don't have argumentation like that, it's not going to get you anywhere, but also you can't respond. So in terms of fairness, it's going to be less persuasive. It looks like you're evading the chance to have that kind of engagement with your opposition. Onus of proof doesn't exist. Those of you, when you get to Easters who are going, will notice that Sydney teams say all the time, that team had to prove this or they will lose. Or they didn't prove Y, therefore there's no chance that they can win. There is no burden of proof, there's no onus of proof, it doesn't exist. No team has a harder job than any other team, and topics are always going to be equally balanced. So obviously, sometimes there will be really important issues, but there's never something that before the debate starts that a team had to prove. There's no onus of proof. Also, teams have to have both positive and negative cases, and this is particularly true for the negative team. So if you're the negative team, you can't run what we call a straight negation. So that basically means that in response to a topic, you can't just say the affirmative team is wrong, right? So if the topic is that we should ban smoking, you can't just, at the neg, in response, say, oh, the affirmative team told you that smoking was bad for your health, but it's totally not, and just be like, it's not bad for your health, it's not bad for your health. You still have to run your own substantive case, which is about why we should allow smoking and why that is an appropriate step to be taken. Does that make sense? Do people see the difference there? You've always got to have your own case that will stand despite what the opposing, or usually the affirmative team say. So keep that in mind. You can't just negate. Obviously, tactically, negation is a very good thing. You're going to do that in your rebuttal, but you've got to have your own legs to stand on at the end of the day. Third speakers. Third speakers aren't allowed to have any new material, as I'm sure you've probably noticed by now. So their key job is to do rebuttal. The biggest question here, though, is what actually counts as new material. And this can be a grey area, and it's important that adjudicators and speakers understand. Because the impact of new material on the debate is nil. If the adjudicator thinks the material that you're bringing is new, They will write it down, but they won't factor it into the decision. So it doesn't matter how good it is, doesn't matter how amazing it is, it doesn't matter how game-changing it is. At the end of the day, if it's new and you're the third speaker, it's not going to get taken into account. So what is new argumentation? It's not a continuation of something that's already happened in the debate. So if it's been mentioned, if it's been argued, if you're using a new example for a piece of rebuttal to a point that's already happened, or you've got a new way of explaining something that's already been discussed, that's fine. What isn't okay is totally new ideas that haven't been discussed at all. So if we go back to my earlier example of that we should ban smoking, if the affirmative team have talked about why it's bad for your health and why it's socially bad because people have to go outside to smoke, if the third speaker of the affirmative team comes out and says, and now I want to talk about the impacts of, I don't know, secondhand smoke, and no one in the debate had mentioned it or talked about it, then that's going to be new material. Typically as well, people come out with a new stakeholder. So if you're an adjudicator and the third speaker seems to have this brand new stakeholder and you're like, hold on, we haven't talked about that group of people at all, then it's probably new material. And usually people, as an adjudicator, it's important to check because usually people go back to pre-prepared material when it's new. So that's just an easy indicator. If someone's been stumbling through a rebuttal for 2 minutes and they pull out this card and they can just wax lyrical about an issue, that should sort of tick you off and you should be like, hold on, why is this prepared material? Has it been discussed in the debate? So no new material for third speakers. If there is new material, like I said, it just doesn't get taken into account. So adjudicators will write it down so they can read it back to you later and tell you it was new, but they won't factor it into the decision. So that's important for third speakers too. If you're a third speaker, don't waste your time with new material. Even if you think it's amazingly, groundbreakingly awesome and it's going to make your team win the debate, it's not going to be taken into account. The catch-22 is you waste your time on something that isn't going to get used when you could be gaining ground in other ways. So don't be tempted by the trap. You're not allowed to have new material at third speaker. No invalid or hung cases. A hung case is where the first speaker presents their argumentation and then it's unclear what the team line is. So for example, if the topic was that we should ban, or that we should allow, that we should ban euthanasia, right? That's the topic. The first affirmative argues that euthanasia means the taking of a life. That's it. That's the extent of their argumentation. Somebody always dies with euthanasia and it's akin to, to taking a life. That's the end of their analysis. But then the second affirmative speaker gets up and says, it's always wrong to take a life. It's always wrong to kill somebody. The problem with that case is that at the first speaker, it's unclear what the team line of the affirmative is. And the way you check for a hung case is if the negative could just agree with all the material of the first speaker. So in that example, the first aff says, well, this always means taking of a life. And the first negative can get up and say, yep, it does, and we're fine with that. Okay? So the case of the team is unclear. So you can't save your case, if you like, or save the punchline or the kicker or whatever it is until your second speaker. That's not allowed. That's a hung case. Any clues as to why?
There's no debate.
There's no debate, yeah.
Doesn't allow the negative to respond.
Yeah, exactly. It's really unfair because it doesn't allow the negative to respond. So one of their speakers has no chance to respond to your case because they have no idea what it is. Okay, so hung cases are particularly problematic. Like I said, you're not going to automatically lose because there are no ways to automatically lose a debate, but it is going to impact on your persuasiveness fairly heavily if you hang your case. Invalid cases are things like truistic cases, so like the example I mentioned earlier, tomorrow is the day after today. If you got some kind of empirical topic that was like tomorrow is another day, obviously that debate is supposed to be about hope and, taking all the opportunities life presents you and all those happy other things. But if you define it as tomorrow is the day after today, therefore tomorrow is another day, and that's your team case, like, one, way to just spoil the fun of debating, but two, invalid case, because there's absolutely no way that your opposition can respond to the way that you formulated that case. So you can't have an invalid case or an invalid argument in that way, because there's no way for them to respond. And then finally, argument by example. What you don't want is an example that consists solely of an argument. Much like an English essay, where you set it up in that horrific Peel or Teal structure, harking back for a few of you. You have your point, you have your explanation, you have your example, and the point is that your example supports your explanation. It doesn't do the work for you. And the particular problems with argument by example are usually relevance, because speakers tend to forget to explain why those arguments are relevant and expect that the judge will just take for granted that that's a relevant example. But also they're often not logical, because people aren't explaining the principles behind them and why things happen. So you don't want to have argumentation solely by example. Same as argument by expert. You know, anyone remember those like B and C grade debates where someone gets up and they say, so-and-so from the Age did a report on this issue, and they said, insert 2-minute slab of text here, right? Not particularly persuasive because it's not an argument. It's not developing or moving forward that argument. It's just one gigantic example. So those are things that are going to be less persuasive. Manner. So there are two major elements. Oh, sorry, anyone have any questions on matter? I'm really bad at asking for questions. No, we're good. All right. Manner. So two major elements. So vocal and non-vocal. So pretty self-explanatory. Again, here we're just looking for whether it makes someone more or less persuasive. And I'll preface this whole discussion with essentially, and you'll get sick of hearing me say it in 2 minutes, most of what you're looking for in manner is just being natural and being comfortable. So you'll notice that you have a totally different speaking style to someone else on your team, and someone else in the debate will have a different speaking style as well, and that's fine. So it's not that there's one perfect model of speaking that we're looking for as a judge, it's that the person is persuasive, or to the extent that they're not, we're looking for that to take into account in marking. So don't panic if you're thinking there's some kind of one-size-fits-all, because there isn't. So, vocal. Body language, obviously, needs to be natural, shouldn't be too crazy. Any kind of like crazy gesturing that looks, you know, like someone's in a drama play, not appropriate for debating. Why? It's distracting. You shouldn't be worried about where someone's going next or what kind of dance move they're about to pull. You should be listening to their material. Eye contact, obviously you want eye contact that's quite balanced, that moves around the room, that's natural. You'll see a lot of newer debaters do eye contact where they like pick a point on the wall and they just give their whole speech staring at some random point on the wall, but they don't actually look anyone in the eye. It doesn't really count as eye contact. Like, it's a good start, but it's not quite there. Likewise, freaky eye contact where people just stare at the adjudicator for like the whole not particularly persuasive. So like I said, looking for naturalness, not necessarily just checking the box. So it's not like they had eye contact because they stared at me for 8 minutes. Like if you were creeped out, not particularly persuasive. And like I said with gestures, again, you just want it to be natural. So we don't want a lot of pacing, but some movement is fine. People aren't going to speak like really rigidly. Naturalness is the key. In terms of not, fail. That first one should be non-vocal, second one should be vocal. Error. In terms of vocal, so we've just done non-vocal. In terms of vocal, volume and pace. So obviously, people's speech needs to move at a kind of pace which is comfortable, that an adjudicator can take notes if you're the judge. So if you talk really quickly like me, watch out. Same principle though, you don't want to talk so slowly that the adjudicator and the audience is dozing off, being like, hurry up and get to your point. Not particularly good either. Volume, again, nice and loud so that you can be heard. You don't want people to be straining to hear you. But if you get a small classroom at Easters, be wary. If you're yelling really, really loudly, people are going to feel like they're being assaulted in the room, okay? And that's not persuasive either. So be careful with how you adjust your tone. And just think about that. How appropriate is it for the space? Clarity and language choice. Obviously, people speaking clearly enough and enunciating all their words is very useful as a judge. You can understand what they're saying. But also, part of that is their language choice. So ideally, people will use words that the average reasonable person as the judge will understand and can engage with. They won't be using big, long terms or like something where you need a medical dictionary or a legal dictionary to look up the words that they're using. So there should be words that people can broadly understand, but they should then, that said, be appropriately specific. So I've never really heard a convincing sentence that ended with, and stuff. But that's just me. So that's basically what you're looking for. As a judge, as a side note, this is the area I think where people get the most offended when you give them feedback. Speaking style is probably, you know, the one real cut to the heart. Like, you can tell someone their argument was crap for hours, and they'll probably still smile and nod at you, but the easy way to make someone upset is to critique their manner, and particularly in a way that's quite open. So if you do want to give feedback to manner, in terms of manner, and you think it's something that is something someone will take personally, consider whether you want to do that in your actual oral adjudication, or whether you want to do that in personal feedback afterwards. We're going to talk about that balance a bit later, but I think that it is really important to keep in mind. As a personal example, I used to, and still sort of do sometimes, touch my papers excessively. I'm in an interesting pattern that goes something like step forward, touch paper, step to the side, touch paper, step forward, touch paper, step to the back. And I never noticed until someone I debated with at a tournament, at a DAB tournament, once said to me, do you know you touched a piece of paper 87 times in that speech? And I was just kind of like, I've actually never been so horrified in my whole life. And that kind of stuff is because people just don't notice it. So when you're looking at someone and you're like, God, that hair flick is so annoying, get a bobby pin, they don't notice that they're doing it. So you want to be really careful that you're, yeah, you two over there. You want to be careful, that you're not sort of offending someone inadvertently. And the other thing with manner is obviously if someone has a physical impairment, that isn't going to unnecessarily impact on their manner score. So, for example, if someone is, in a wheelchair, you wouldn't penalise them for not moving around appropriately. Likewise, if someone has a stutter, for example, obviously to some extent that's going to affect their clarity, but to the same extent an average reasonable person would realise that person has a difficulty that they can't overcome, and so you wouldn't be giving them a manner score of 10 because they stutter. Does that make sense? So you've got to have some discretion in the manner category. Issues, types of manner, basically what I've said. As long as people are comfortable in their style and as long as it looks natural, it's more likely to be persuasive. Some people aren't funny, I'm probably one of them, I can't tell jokes to save myself. I laugh before the punchline and no one laughs afterwards, and it's just woeful. But some people are really funny. So people who are funny, if it works for them, if they tell jokes, if they've got funny one-liners, that might really help their manner score. For other people, they might just look awkward. That's not generally particularly persuasive. In terms of weight, you want to be careful that you don't double count manner. So sometimes people say, well, their argument wasn't really that great. I got where they were going, but they didn't really have any examples, but they sounded so excited when they delivered it that I was, I was super persuaded. And then they get marks for having really good manner, and they get marks for having really good matter. So just having good manner cannot say bad matter. Sure, you'll still get a good manner score, but make sure you're not double counting. So when you're thinking about how persuasive someone's matter is, make sure you take away as much as you can their presentation and think about the content of their argument. Any questions? No? Fabulous. I usually do this course in 4 hours, so this is actually a crash course, so I apologise if I'm rambling ahead. Method. So structure and all sorts of lovely things. 3 key elements to this. You're looking out as an adjudicator for individual structure, team structure, and responsiveness. So individual structure, the usual kind of stuff. So signposting, this is my rebuttal, that was my rebuttal, now I'm moving on to my first argument, it's about X, now I'm done with that argument, I'm moving on to my next argument, you know the drill. Those kinds of things are important. Also, signposting team material is very helpful. There's this weird trend in university debating where people kind of don't want to say what their second speaker is going to talk about in case there's some weird poaching of the material and then it's not new and exciting. Personally, as a judge, I would advise against that. I think it's much easier for your adjudicator to have a good roadmap with the team line and know where your case is going, but make your own strategic choices as you will. Self-contained arguments. This is just that every argument is on its own, so that every argument has a start and an end, and that your speech isn't a stream of consciousness of just ideas jumbled together. So that's really important for good individual structure. And lastly, timing. People, judges will penalise you for speaking over time. It depends on how narky they are, how much they had to drink, whether they picked up the night before, etc. But if they're in a shitty mood, they will penalise you once it gets to 8 minutes or 5. So don't be one of those people, and I'm one of them, that tends to think I'm on a roll, I'm just going to keep going. You will get penalised for speaking over time. The reason for that is that it indicates that you don't have control of your material, that you haven't allocated your time and prioritised your issues correctly. So if you're still going because you think this is so important, I just can't not say this, then you didn't prioritise your speech correctly. Because if it was that important, you would have said it earlier on, okay? Unless you think all of your arguments are super, super important, in which case you probably need to take your self-confidence down a notch. Likewise, speaking under time is going to impact on your method score for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's going to impact on your matter. So if you don't have enough material to fill out the time, your arguments are going to be underdeveloped. So that's one way that speaking under time is going to harm you. The second way in terms of method is just clearly you haven't had good team organisation, you haven't allocated or prioritised your arguments so that everyone has enough to say. So that's something that's important. Team structure. Team split, like I said, much like the team signposting, the same thing. Tell us what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. Also, the second thing with team structure is the importance of material. There's nothing more devastating as a judge than seeing at the third point, second subsection of the second speaker of the negative team, the key point of the debate. Like, everyone's been alluding to it, no one actually talks about it. Make sure that the important material, if you're a speaker, is early on. That might mean second speakers out there, I feel your pain, you get stuck with crap, debate after debate after debate. And it can be really tempting to be like, oh, I've got a great idea, I'm going to keep it to myself, but it's a really poor tactical choice. If it's a good issue, it will come out early, and it will keep getting discussed, and you'll be able to discuss it in your rebuttal. So keep that in mind. Importance of material is something that is easy to spot as a judge. If there's nothing really happening in the opening two speakers of the debate, but then the debate really starts at the second two, it's a key indicator that people haven't organised their material appropriately. The last element of method is responsiveness. So this is your rebuttal. In some extent, again, this is a blend, so it's going to be partially matter, obviously in the content of that engagement, but it's also going to be partially method. So if you just don't do any rebuttal, problem, right? Like, not going to fill that box. But also, this is where the kind of fairness idea in debating comes back in. So if you're the negative team and your affirmative runs some weird definition or some crazy model, it's not expected, it's not likely that you guys have prepped for it, and you manage to respond, you manage to pull things together, you manage to change your material or whatever it is, and engage with that, you're going to do well in terms of responsiveness. Okay, so that's where adjudicators can recognise that difficulty that comes out. Speaker roles. You guys should know this kind of stuff already. If you don't, look back at the video and check out the slides, but broadly, the key things we've talked about, obviously have a definition and model if you need it at first speaker, team split, substantive arguments, no rebuttal for the first AF, unsurprisingly. Then for the next four speakers, rebuttal, material, rebuttal, material, rebuttal, material. Third speakers, rebuttal and summary, no new material. Okay? The way that you structure those parts of your speech don't really matter. So you can put your rebuttal any way you like. In this hemisphere, generally we put our rebuttal first, but for some reason in the United States they put it last. I think it's weird. To be brutally honest, I'd put it first if I was you, just because poorer judges or poorer quality judges are more likely to only be familiar with our style and think it's weird. But beyond that, it's okay. And particularly at third, people tend to interweave their rebuttal and their summary, and that's okay too. So as a judge, make sure you are actively looking for those things, not just expecting university debaters to say to you, here are the 3 reasons, for my rebuttal, and now to my team summary, here it is. Usually they will blend it in, so make sure that you're looking actively for that. Question?
I've had some different adjudicators say, sometimes I've done like the summary with rebuttal and they say, put in a summary at the end. Is there like some general consensus?
No, that's the kind of crap thing sometimes about adjudicators, is there's no general consensus about what is more or less persuasive. Very clearly under the rules that govern the Victorians rules comp, and I'm pretty sure Australs runs under the ADG too. Kind of. Broadly, those rules, which are about the only written rules of competition we have in the state, say that any way that you want to do it is fine, as long as it's there and it can be identified. I think the important thing is to signpost it so it's clear which is which, and what our team told you was, or what our second speaker told you was, or the analysis we provided you on this point was, so it's nice and clear where your kind of summation differs from your rebuttal. Definitions, everybody's favourite. So, the purpose of a definition is just to identify the issues in the debate. It's not to prove that you can use the Oxford English Dictionary or anything of the like. So, we don't particularly need words like the and smoking looked up. We just need you to tell us in what context the debate is happening and what the key words mean. So that's the key thing. So, prohibited definitions, ones that don't have a logical link to the topic. So if your definition doesn't relate to what the topic is about, you're in trouble. I'm pretty sure Easters is semi-divine, right, of definition, which should be about the same as everywhere else, which is basically your definition needs to have like a link to what's happening in the real world. So if the topic was this house would ban smoking, it would probably not be appropriate to define that topic as being about banning the ancient American Indian practice of communicating via smoking. Right? Like, not particularly topical, not going to have that logical link that you need. No truistic or self-proving definitions. Much like I said in the earlier example, you don't want to have that like tomorrow was the day after today, therefore our definition is that it's another day. Right? Not going anywhere. Time or place set. It's unfortunate, and hindsight is great, but you can't backdate the debate. So you can't say, we're having this debate before we invaded Iraq, or we're having this debate before the Second World War, or we're having this debate in some other time. We also can't forward date debates. So we're having this debate in like 2047 when there's no global warming and we don't have cars. It doesn't matter that we don't have oil because we've learned to run things on air. Not appropriate, okay? You can't time set debates. You also can't place set debates beyond what is reasonable. So if the topic gives you a place, that's great, life's really easy for you. If it doesn't, think about the context that it's happening in. So broadly, like Australia is an appropriate definition, you know, Australasia, the world, developed nations, Western liberal democracies, all those kinds of things are fine. But if you've got a topic like, for example, that we should ban smoking, you can't say, yep, I'm going to set this in Kyrgyzstan, because you did some project where you learnt about, you know, smoking in Kyrgyzstan and its like cultural implications, right? You can't place set things in a really weird way. If it's too small, if it's too niche, if it's not something that would immediately come to mind, it's probably not an appropriate place set. On that note, you'll notice at Easters, or you should notice, that Easters is a bigger competition than probably most of you participated in, and there will be teams from all around Australia. So in your definitions, don't assume things are about Victoria, but likewise, don't assume that people understand things about Victoria. So in an Easters Grand Final a couple of years ago, people were throwing around things like, yeah, well, if I lived in Toorak, and if I lived in like Mossman, and I was like, I don't know anything about that suburb. Like, I know Toorak, but I don't know suburbs in New South Wales. So just be careful about those one-liners that you throw around. People might not understand. Definitional challenges. Who has ever done a definitional challenge? Who's seen one? A few people. Okay. These broadly make adjudicators want to cry, and I'm included in that definition. Definition debates are really crap, so as a debater, be warned. Unless you think they have legitimately done something that offends one of those rules, like it's not just a little bit annoying, it actually offends one of those rules, please, please, please don't definitional challenge. It's just not worth it, right? The debate that you have will be no good. If people do assess, or they do claim it's a definitional debate, there's a couple of different options. The first is that they'll just say, we don't agree with your definition, and they'll run their own case. And the problem with that will be the AF will run their case, and the neg will say, screw you, we don't like your definition, and run their own case. Who sees where the issue lies?
No clash.
No clash at all, right? Like total tram track debates, just like blinkers on. We don't want to know what you want to talk about. We are just going all balls ahead with our definition, okay? No engagement. So that's option number one. Question?
Yeah, so if there's actually a definitional challenge happens, do they have to get approval from the adjudicator, or they can just go?
No, they don't have to get approval from the adjudicator. So that's a really good question and worth mentioning. The adjudicator during the debate doesn't really have an active role. So people can't ask you questions, you can't interject during people's speeches. So that's a good question. I'll explain to you what should happen. This is the best case scenario. So that was the worst case scenario. You get a tram track debate, they don't want to engage with each other. The adjudicator then has to say, well, which was the more reasonable definition? Hopefully one of the teams provided you with some argumentation about why their definition was better. Again, that's a good scenario, usually they don't. But then up to you as the adjudicator to say, as the average reasonable person, what is the more reasonable of those two definitions? And then you move on from there. But that all happens at the end of the debate. It doesn't happen when they say that they want to challenge. It happens right at the end. So then you're encompassing what's happened in the whole debate. So this is where you get the best case scenario, which is there'll be an even if argument. So the negative team will say, we don't agree with your definition, here's why. And they'll do their own case, but they'll say, even if we bought your definition, even if we agreed with your arguments, here's why they're still incorrect. So the advantage of that is, they've said that they don't agree with the definition, they've argued, like they've had actual constructive arguments about why their definition is better, but then even if you as the judge don't agree that their definition was better, they've also shot down their opposition's material. So that's, as a judge, what will ideally happen. The catch-22 is, as a judge, that very rarely happens, and in fact I've never seen a definitional debate where people have followed the right procedure. But it's something to keep in mind, particularly as debaters. So if someone does do something crazy and you want to challenge, make sure you don't hang or put all of your eggs in one basket or hang all of your hats on the same tree or any of those other similar phrases. Make sure you do address the opposition's material. It's fine to go with your own case, but you need to address what they're saying as well. Do people understand that even-if structure? Yeah. Does anyone have any questions at that point? No? Great. Scoring. Just really briefly, because this kind of stuff, I'm sure you will have old people to help you through. Scoring Austral style and school style is out of 100. So 40 points are allocated to matter, 40 for manner, 20 for method. So, like I said earlier, great manner can't say bad matter, and that's because they're worth the same amount on the score sheet. Manner's worth half of that. Method, is worth half of that, so keep that in mind. You really want to be balancing both your content and your presentation skills. That said, the average is only 75, so all the people that got enters or ATARs, if they are now, of like 99 and above, don't panic. It's not because you're unintelligent, it's because the average is 75. And the harsh reality is that most people don't score outside of the 68 to 82 range, particularly in Austral style. World style is a bit broader, but particularly in Austral style, people are relatively conservative when they mark. So please don't feel like you're doing woefully or you're getting like the equivalent of a C+ or whatever, however you want to work it out. 75 is the average, so that's how you should judge your performance. If you're getting anything above that, kudos to you. If you're slightly below that, don't panic. Think about where you need to work. So that's below that is then the appropriate average for each area, so 30, 30, 15. Consider as well, if you're the judge, that taking 1 point off someone for method is like taking 2 points off them for manner or matter. So, someone who has really fabulous matter might get 32, someone who has good matter might get 31, someone who has average matter will get 30. But if someone has good method, be wary of giving them 17, because then you've effectively given them 34 in one of the other categories. So just be wary that that is worth half as much as the others. So I've spoken ahead of myself. Assessing scores, limited range, don't be sad about that. Margins. 0 to 4 points between the teams is a close debate. It's not a steamrolling, you haven't done poorly. If your margins are within that area, you should feel excellently about your debate. 5 to 9 is clear. So if you think at the end of this debate as a judge, it was clear that one team had won, but the other team was still in contention in some ways, they still made good points, they still spoke well, you're going to be in the clear margin. If you think as the judge that one team got absolutely steamrolled, it's probably going to be 10 to 15. Those kind of margins don't really happen all that often, to be brutally honest, but that's the very clear range. So keep that in mind when you are adjudicating. You want to be asking yourself, well, how close was this really? And then you can think about your margin. Yeah?
Didn't you just say there's no draws in debate? Why is that 0 margin?
That's true. Good catch. There can't be a margin of 0, you're correct. It should be 1 to 4. There are no draws. Very good. Score should be assessed holistically. We all make mistakes. Clearly I was doing these too late. Score should be assessed holistically. So that goes to what I'm about to say next, which is process. So you don't want to fall into the trap where you just add up manner, method for all of the 6 speakers in the debate, and then you get out your calculator and you add up all the totals and you go, oh, cool, the neg wins. Right? Not the way to adjudicate. Why? Anyone?
Because it might be which team is most persuasive.
Very good, yep, using the right catchword, so they might not have been the most persuasive team. But also, if you just write down speaker scores for people as the debate goes along, you're not actually assessing the debate as a whole. So if the first speaker for the app spoke and you were like, yeah, pretty good, I'd give them 78, you're not actually comparing them to the third speaker of the neg. So you want to make sure that you ask yourself bigger questions. So, work backwards and fill out your score sheet last. First question, which team won? Pretty easy. Who do you feel like was ahead and why? By what? By how much or what margin? So, did they win by a lot? Was it clear? Was it close? Then you know where you're in the ballpark. You can move up and down. Well, it was close, but it wasn't excruciating, so it wasn't 1 point. Probably more like 3 points. You know, you can give yourself some leeway. Then you want to say, what were the team's strengths and weaknesses in which area? So broadly, were their strengths matter? Were their strengths manner? And then you want to go, which speakers were the strongest and which were the weakest. So you're working backwards. So your speaker scores will depend on how close you think the debate was and what the margin of the debate you think was. That means that sometimes when you look at speaker scores, you're like, well, those 2 speakers weren't totally equal. Like one of them was slightly better than the other. And that means that your speaker scores might not be 210% reflective of how people were in the debate, but it's better that your overall result is reflective in terms of which team was better and which team's, arguments were doing the winning, a la listening to David. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for who was doing the better job. Delivery. Adjudicators should obviously be nice, provide, feedback, praise, critical and constructive in terms of feedback. So that's important because you don't want people to leave and never come back to debating. That's really sad. But also, you don't want to give people the wrong idea of a debate. Often a debate is very good, and then adjudicators spend a lot of time talking about 1 or 2 things that weren't done well to illustrate why a team won or lost. But then those teams leave and they're like, oh my god, all she said was things we did badly. Like, what are we doing here? This is terrible. So make sure you balance that. When I say read your room and give feedback accordingly, if you have a room full of people who have never debated before, there's not much point giving them like a super intense, adjudication of like the issues, the sub-points of the issues and how they played out, if the bigger problem was none of them spoke to time, none of them had any structure, and their manner was, quite shocking. Like, make sure you think about what kind of feedback people can use when you give your adjudication. Lastly, remember that debating's a team effort. Sometimes adjudicators are unduly harsh on like the content of a second speaker, and they dig into someone, and it's kind of unfair because debating is about working as a team. So if you think that those kinds of things have happened, make sure that you're giving that as constructive criticism to the whole team. In terms of structuring your speech, your adjudication, a couple of options. You can go overview of issues. These were the issues that happened. Here's how I thought they played out. Good if you thought that matter was the key point in the debate. Not very good if you thought something else was the key point in the debate. That doesn't really fit into the issue structure. You can go manner, matter, method. Nice and easy, and point out the differences, the strengths and the weaknesses. What you're looking for is some kind of comparison, so your adjudication should always be saying, you guys did this, these guys did this, here's how I thought persuasion played out, not just like, you did X, Y, Z, you guys didn't do X, Y, Z. You want them to fit in so they understand how the debate actually happened. Or speaker by speaker. I wouldn't really recommend speaker by speaker for university style debating, but if you have an overly simplistic debate, you might find it helpful. So there's different options. It's about reading your room. It's about thinking about the decision that you've made. So I would usually, personally, I do a mixture of the top two. So if I think that everyone's manner has been really quite solid and everyone's method has been quite solid, I won't waste time in talking about them. I'll usually just be like, they were good, well done. Now I'm going to talk about the issues in the debate. But likewise, if it hasn't been that kind of debate, you've got to adjust your style so that you spend your time talking about relevant things. Broadly, in terms of time, your delivery should be about as long as a speech in the debate and not much longer. So resist the urge, if you're the adjudicator, to talk for 30 or 40 minutes because you like the sound of your own voice. Because everyone will have well and truly switched off. The adjudicator will hate you because you're making the tab late, and the speakers in the room will be like, oh, get it over with. The last thing about delivery is that where you give your decision, i.e. where you say who won or lost, is up to you. But a word of warning. Broadly, I think people respond better, particularly in debates that are close, i.e. where teams think they both were in with a chance to win, that you put them out of their misery early. The reason for that is that it's much easier to explain the reasons for your decision than to try and explain reasons for a decision you are yet to give. And so when teams don't know if they won or lost, they don't know what context to put your comments in. So they will go from high when you're like, that was good, they're like, yes, we're winning, to low when you're like, not so great. And they will just keep going between those two emotions, right? Until after 8 minutes, you're like, okay, so now I'm going to tell you who won, and they're already on the emotional bandwagon. They're 110% more likely to hate you or disagree with your decision at that point, because they were like, but we totally thought we were winning when you were saying those things we thought we were winning, right? So you want to make sure you put people out of their misery early. Lastly, trainees and panellists, impressing your chair. So those of you who judge Easters or who go to Australs or whatever, there's different kind of levels of adjudicators. Trainees are the lowest level. They're generally people who haven't done much adjudication at all. They don't get a vote, so their decision doesn't count. But it's really important for trainees to engage with the process. So my tips for trainees are take good notes. So make sure that you've got good enough notes so that when your people who are in your room start talking about why they made the decision that they made, that you can actually engage with that. The second one is practice actually deciding who wins. Can't tell you how many times I've been chairs of panels where at the end of the debate I go, so trainees, what did you think? And they go, oh, I don't know. And like they go 5 rounds of a tournament never actually making a decision. And then they are promoted to being a trainee and they panic because they're like, I've never actually had to decide who won. So don't worry if you get it wrong, it doesn't matter, you don't have a vote. But it's important to come to that decision so that you know and you have your own reasons for why you made it and you can get good feedback about that. Speak up, so ask questions. If you don't understand why your chairperson made a certain decision, ask them about it and push them on the answers till they give them to you. But at the same point, know when to shut up. If you don't have a vote and you don't agree with who won the debate, that's sad. And you should talk about it so you find out why the other people made the decisions that they made. But to the extent that you don't have a vote, 15 minutes after they've made that decision, you probably don't want to still be whinging at them. Try not to put those kind of like more senior adjudicators offside. In terms of panellists, these are people that do have a vote, but they're not the kind of like chair of a panel, so they're not sort of running the show, but their votes count equally with everyone else. Stay calm. So even if you're paired with someone really good or the CA, don't panic. Don't be like, oh my god, I'm going to make the wrong decision. Please don't ever think, what decision are they going to make so I can make the right one. Make sure you judge the debate on the debate. Have clear reasons for your decision and be prepared to explain them. A few years ago at Australs, and it has happened in other tournaments, some panellists rolled their chair. So the two panellists gave a different decision to their chairperson, and so that decision was the one that team ended up winning. And then neither of those panellists wanted to give any feedback to the teams, which meant that no one explained to those teams why some of the adjudicators thought they won the debate, and those speakers didn't get any feedback. So it's fine if you roll your chair. It happens all the time. I've done it countless times, and I've been rolled countless times. It happens, but it's important that you have some reasons for your decision. Because if you can't explain it, you look stupid. You look really stupid. And the teams walk away and they go, well, we won, but like, why? Just because, you know, someone thought we looked pretty. And the team lost are absolutely outraged because they're like, the chair just got rolled and the panellists can't even tell us why they think our opposition won, right? Like, people get really grumpy. So make sure you have reasons and you can explain them. If you don't have reasons and you can't explain them, that is a hint to what?
Shut up.
Well, no, that's a hint to think very carefully about why. You shouldn't have made the decision if you don't have any reasons for why you think the team won, right? Go back to your notes, think about it, take more time if you need to. Don't judge your performance on the basis of the room quality. At every tournament, judges come back and they say, oh man, I was judging this total bin room. They were really bad, they've never debated before. The adjudication call must think I suck. That's not true. Adjudication calls rotate adjudicators around. The worst speakers at the tournament often need the most feedback. So that can be a good sign. So don't panic if you think that you're judging a room that isn't that great. It's not indicative of your performance. If you've got a DCA or a CA as your chair, step up. So that will be because the AdCo wants to watch you and they want to see how well you're doing and how good your feedback is. The brackets know who these people are an indication to my experience at my first Worlds, where in the last round I was a chair and I gave terrible, terrible feedback about an adjudicator in my room who turned out to be the ESL DCA of the tournament. So she was on the AdCo and I gave her like a 2 and said she should never be allowed to adjudicate again. Surprisingly, I didn't break to the finals as a judge. So know who those people are. Yeah.
Monique, but what does DCA and CA stand for?
Excellent question. Sorry. See, this is why you should interrupt. How did no one ask me about that jargon? CA stands for Chief Adjudicator. So that's the kind of head honcho, if you will, the person that makes the topics, that organises what adjudicators are going to see what room. DCAs are Deputy Chief Adjudicators, and they help the Chief Adjudicator do their job. So they make topics, they organise who's going where, and they get it. Basically, they decide what adjudicators will adjudicate finals. So that's why it's important to know who they are. And then lastly, like I've said to panellists, rolling your chair isn't the end of the world, even if people tell you it is. So at the end of the day, someone else in that room agreed with you. So someone else thought that the team that you thought won. So even if your chairperson disagrees, don't panic. It's a 2-1 vote or a 3-2 vote or whatever. The chairperson is usually someone who's experienced, but that doesn't mean that they're good. So please don't fret. Don't think that, you know, if you've rolled your chair, it's all over for you. You know, it's not. You may still do really well at the tournament. You probably will if you were doing well beforehand. So don't panic. Questions? Queries, comments? Other? I think I've gone massively over time. Okay. That was a marathon effort. No one has any questions? Great. So this is like the weird little promo. So if you do want to become DAB accredited, you can't become DAB accredited out of this session, but you can sign up for a session to become DAB accredited. The DAB is the Debaters Association of Victoria. I'm not on the executive, no. And they run the schools competition that a lot of you probably participated in when you're in high school. If you want to adjudicate that competition, there's a whole bunch of regions around Melbourne. Also, we do like a junior secondary program later in the year. You can learn to judge, and you get paid for that, which is really nice. So if you're looking to make extra money on the side, that's great. Also, Henry, wherever he is, not here, the MUD schools training program also needs adjudicators from time to time. So you should keep that in mind. So if you want to train to be an adjudicator, please email me. We have finished all of our sessions for this year, but Monash is also doing one of these, and we've done one here. So if there is demand, we'll run another session for people who want to learn to adjudicate. If you have any other questions, or like I say, comments about my lame jokes, you can email me, or if you think of questions later,